This video is going to be about the anterior compartment of the forearm using a cadaver dissection. First, just some big picture facts about the anterior compartment of the forearm. It's always good to have a big picture idea of how a region is organized before you start learning the nitty-gritty details. So the anterior compartment of the forearm is full of muscles that functionally flex the wrist, flex the fingers, or pronate the forearm. They're organized in 3 layers: a superficial layer that has 4 muscles in it, an intermediate layer that has 1 muscle in it, and a deep layer that has 3 muscles in it. Regarding those muscles' innervation, most of them are innervated by the median nerve or a branch of the median nerve called the anterior interosseous nerve. Only 1.5 muscles are innervated by the ulnar nerve. Now let's talk about the big picture view regarding attachments. It's natural to be overwhelmed with the number of muscles that are in the anterior compartment of the forearm, but please don't get overwhelmed because there is logic to their attachment sites. So many of them attach proximally to the medial epicondyle of the humerus. So you might make a list of, well, which muscles attach to the medial epicondyle of the humerus and which ones don't. If the muscle has carpi in its name, like the flexor carpi ulnaris and the flexor carpi radialis, then those muscles act at the wrist, and those muscles attach distally to the base of a metacarpal. If the muscles have digitorum or pollicis in their name, then that means they attach to the phalanges. They act on the digits. So they'll either attach to the middle phalange or the distal phalange. So please keep those big picture tips in your mind when you're learning the attachments of these muscles in the anterior compartment of the forearm. I hope that's helpful. So one last overview slide before we go to the video of the cadaver dissection, and this is the relationship of the muscles of the anterior compartment of the forearm to the carpal tunnel. So the carpal tunnel is formed by the 8 carpal bones. The way they articulate with each other and the shapes of those bones with tubercles, and for the hamate, the hook of the hamate, they form a concave arch. It's concave anteriorly. And the roof of the tunnel is formed by the flexor retinaculum. It's a surprisingly small tunnel, and some of the tendons of the muscles in the anterior compartment of the forearm travel through that carpal tunnel. So which ones are they? They're the 4 tendons of the flexor digitorum superficialis. They're the 4 tendons of the flexor digitorum profundus, the single tendon from the flexor pollicis longus, and then, of course, the median nerve travels through the carpal tunnel. The tendons have synovial tendon sheaths which surround them in order to reduce friction so they can slide and glide through that tunnel smoothly as we move or flex our fingers. So notice none of the tendons that go through the carpal tunnel have carpi in their name. Okay, so now let's go to the cadaver dissection. This video is going to be about the anterior compartment of the forearm. So we have the cadaver supine, and this is the left upper limb. So the anterior compartment of the forearm, the muscles are arranged in 3 layers. And so we're going to go through them layer by layer, and it's really helpful to remember the layers because it will help you remember other facts about those muscles, like nerve innervations and attachments. So when I think about the anterior compartment of the forearm, I think of what are they functionally? They are wrist flexors, finger flexors, and pronators. And many of them attach to the medial epicondyle of the humerus. So this prominent bone right here is the medial epicondyle of the humerus. And it is much more prominent than the lateral epicondyle. And the best way to know that you are at the right epicondyle is to look for the ulnar nerve. The ulnar nerve passes posterior to the medial epicondyle of the humerus in the cubital tunnel. This is the olecranon process of the ulna. So the forearm is completely supinated, and the humerus is really, really externally rotated. So many of the muscles of the anterior compartment of the forearm attach to the medial epicondyle, and those that attach there, many of them attach into what's called the common flexor tendon. So I refer you always to your textbook for the muscle attachments to get those specifics. So the superficial layer of muscles of the anterior compartment of the forearm, we'll start with the pronator teres. So here's the pronator teres. It's a little ragged, but that has 2 heads, and it arises from the medial epicondyle of the humerus. And obviously it's a pronator of the proximal and distal radial ulnar joints. It is innervated by the median nerve, and in fact the median nerve goes between its 2 heads. I'll look for that later to show you, or maybe I just found it. Here it is. Here's the median nerve in the cubital fossa. So the median nerve can get compressed by the pronator teres if it's hypertrophied or there's a hematoma in it or in spasm. The next muscle is the flexor carpi radialis. This also arises from the medial epicondyle. And look at its nice long tendon. So it's got muscle belly proximal, long tendon distally. And then it travels across the wrist, and it's in a tunnel of its own. It's in a tunnel of its own, and then it attaches to the base of the second metacarpal, and maybe the third metacarpal base. So that's the flexor carpi radialis. Carpi means carpus or wrist, so it's a flexor at the wrist. And in fact, if you remember, if you pay attention to the muscles that have carpi in their name, they're all attached to metacarpal bones, to the bases of metacarpal bones. This is also innervated by the median nerve, which innervates many of the muscles or most of the muscles in the anterior compartment of the forearm. So the action of this muscle is wrist flexion and radial deviation. The next muscle in line is the palmaris longus, which is sometimes absent. That also attaches to the medial epicondyle of the humerus. Notice its really long, slender tendon, and it attaches into the palmar fascia. It's a very weak wrist flexor. And it's, I think I might just said already, it's absent in some individuals, or you could even find some variations in how its muscle belly and tendon are arranged. So you might be able to see maybe your cadaver has, instead of a muscle belly being proximally, it's got tendon proximally and then muscle belly in the center of the tendon and then tendon again. Or maybe the muscle belly is distally located at the wrist. So there are some variations that exist in the palmaris longus. The next muscle in this superficial layer is the flexor carpi ulnaris. So there's another carpi, and it attaches to the medial epicondyle, and distally it attaches to the pisiform. In fact, for most people describe that the pisiform is a sesamoid bone within the flexor carpi ulnaris. So it attaches to the pisiform, the hook of the hamate, and the base of the fifth metacarpal base. It's a wrist flexor and an ulnar deviator. It is innervated by the ulnar nerve. And so we'll be able to see the ulnar nerve right here, traveling deep to the flexor carpi ulnaris. Remember the other time we mentioned the ulnar nerve was back here at the cubital tunnel. So the ulnar nerve is traveling in the cubital tunnel, goes between two heads of the flexor carpi ulnaris, and then we see it deep to it, and it innervates it. All right, so that's the superficial layer. The next layer is the flexor digitorum superficialis. Flexor digitorum superficialis. That also attaches to the medial epicondyle. So this is the intermediate layer. It has 4 tendons that go through the carpal tunnel. So this is the first muscle who we've mentioned have tendons that go through the carpal tunnel. That flexor digitorum superficialis travels through the carpal tunnel, and it attaches, here it is in the hand, it attaches, it splits, and the 2 tendons attach to the sides of the shaft of the middle phalange. So the last joint it crosses is the PIP, the proximal interphalangeal joint. So that's the joint at which it primarily acts. So it flexes the PIP. It will also flex the metacarpal phalangeal joint. It'll assist with wrist flexion. The flexor digitorum superficialis is all innervated by the median nerve. Here's the median nerve. So that's the intermediate layer. So now let's go to the deep layer. I'm going to try this. Hopefully this goes well. So the deep layer has 3 muscles in it. Here's the flexor pollicis longus. Look how deep that is. It's so deep it attaches to the interosseous membrane, which we could probably see if I spent the time. This is the flexor digitorum profundus. Profundus means deep. And then the last muscle of the deep layer is the pronator quadratus. All right, so flexor pollicis longus, that's innervated by the anterior interosseous nerve, which is a branch of the median nerve. And it's going to go through the carpal tunnel. And look in the hand, I'm going to wiggle the flexor pollicis longus and see the thumb move. That's going to attach to the distal phalange of the thumb. And remember, there's only 2 phalanges in the thumb. So its primary action is at the interphalangeal joint of the thumb to flex it. But it can act at other joints proximal to that as well. Let's now do the flexor digitorum profundus. Here's the flexor digitorum profundus. It's very deep. Its 4 tendons go through the carpal tunnel. So what do we have going through the carpal tunnel? We've got the 4 tendons of the flexor digitorum superficialis. The 4 tendons of the flexor digitorum superficialis, and the 4 tendons, I don't have them all organized for you, but the 4 tendons of the profundus, and then the flexor pollicis longus, those are the tendons. The median nerve median nerve goes through the carpal tunnel. And then the final thing are the synovial tendon sheaths that surround the tendons. The flexor pollicis longus has its own sheath, and it's called the radial bursa. And then the flexor digitorum profundus and superficialis share a sheath, and that's called the ulnar bursa. And the purpose of those synovial tendon sheaths is to reduce friction. So let's go back to the profundus. If we follow it distally, it goes through the carpal tunnel, and then it's going to go through the split. And I have other videos on this too that you should watch. But the profundus goes through the split in the superficialis, and that profundus tendon goes all the way to the distal phalange. So the last joint it crosses is the distal interphalangeal joint, and in fact, it's the only muscle that flexes the distal interphalangeal joint. It will assist with flexion of the PIP, the MCP, and the wrist, but you want to first think of it as the DIP flexor, the sole DIP flexor. Its innervation, well, it depends on which tendon or muscle belly you're looking at. So it is split. So the profundus to the index and middle are innervated by the anterior interosseous nerve. The profundus to the ring and little are innervated by the ulnar nerve. Okay, so now let's look at the pronator quadratus. This is your last stop in the forearm. That attaches from the radius to the ulna. Look at the fiber direction, and it's a pronator of the forearm. It's innervated by the anterior interosseous nerve, which is a branch of the median. And that's the last muscle that nerve innervates. So to repeat, the anterior interosseous nerve innervates the flexor pollicis longus, the pronator quadratus, pronator quadratus, and then the two profundus tendons that are on the radial side that go to the index and middle. All right, well, good luck with your studying, and I recommend watching my hand videos.